What's up, folks? A little early, 1 minute early. So I'm going to give it some time for folks to trickle in, but you should be seeing me live in the Zoom if that's where you're watching this. Otherwise, you may be watching this live in the Facebook. If so, the Zoom link is here as well in the comments section. If you want to jump into the Zoom in the Facebook, you'll be able to clearly watch this. You're watching it now. But if you want to engage with us in the chat, the best way to do that is to jump into the Zoom. So encouraging you guys to do that and use the link in the comment section. And in the meantime, I'm going to make sure that the chat works because we've had challenges with that in the past. Chat available to everyone. There we go. And I'm going to drop a test in the chat. And let's see if you all can see that. If so, comment in the chat. Let me know you're here. Let me know you can see me, hear me, and we're going to jump in 1 minute. All right, now we're talking. Audio, video are fine. Andres, what's up, buddy? Good to see you there. Good connecting with you on email today, man. This is great. So I am getting feedback inside of the Zoom, which means that a good number of you are here. And then off to my right, I have the Facebook stream up. So I know that you guys can see me there as well. And yeah, we're going to jump right in, man. I want to be respectful of everybody's time, try and keep these things to 40 minutes each Wednesday when we do them, which is every Wednesday. So today we're digging into the archives, actually, and we're bringing back our buy box narrative training. And if you've been with us for 6 months, you'll remember that the very first training we did was on the buy box. And so we're refreshing that training because we're getting a lot of questions around the development and the crafting of the buy box narrative. And it's so important getting this dialed in that I wanted to revisit it, bring back this training, specifically these worksheets and the revised versions of them. So if you've seen these before, stick around because they look different this time around, and I'm going to show you how and why. And so let me jump in to a screen share and we're going to hit it. And so what you guys should be seeing now is my desktop and a browser window, and specifically a buy box narrative. And so that's what we're going to focus our efforts on today. Let me also pull up the chat. Great. So now I can keep up with you guys on the chat as well. So, and drop questions in the chat. We're going to keep this one interactive because I'm not running through a deck. I'm actually going to work in one particular worksheet. And so I'll be able to keep the chat live and be engaging as we're going through it. So yeah, feel free to leverage the chat. For those of you that are in Zoom, drop it there. For those of you that are on Facebook, hopefully somebody on my team can push those questions through to the chat here in the Zoom as well. In the meantime, let's hit it. So what's the buy box? What's the buy box narrative? So I'll start by defining it. For those that are hearing this term for the very first time, it's essentially your elevator pitch on what you buy. It's your buy box. It's the specific asset and the nuances and the descriptors of the asset that you're a buyer of. And that's clearly going to be of value to you because then you can have clarity around what it is that you're a buyer of. But then it's also going to be of value to the folks that you're working with, whether that's agents or brokers or wholesalers, right? They'll be able to have some clarity around what you're a buyer of, and then they'll ideally bring you that asset. That's what they'll show you. And so here's what ours looks like. And we'll use ours as reference, and we'll start with the end in mind, and then we'll work backwards. So our single family, because we want to be specific, what asset class, and then what strategy, right? First and foremost. So, and we'll talk a little bit about this when we get into the worksheet, but asset type, single family, multifamily, industrial, commercial office. And so then you got to dial it in, and what strategy, ADA levels and additions, new construction, BRRRR strategy. And so we're going to focus on single family, ADA levels and additions. That's our primary strategy. And that's what we're going to talk about, the narrative and the buy box. for that asset class and for that strategy. So ours is, I'm looking for dated capes, ranches, and bungalows in the better half of Union County in the 200 to 350 range that I could add value to and force appreciation on. That's my narrative. That's my buy box. And then for the benefit of this collective, we went a little bit deeper and we expanded on that. And so what you see in the parentheses there is our descriptors, how we get like really narrow. And so you could share this, right? I'm looking for dated 1950s to 1960s capes, ranches, and bungalows in the better half of Union County, New Jersey. That's 13 of the 21 towns in the county in the 200 to 350 range that I could add value. That's heavy construction, forced appreciation, and to force appreciation and set new out sale records. So I want to be listing at the top of the market. That's the ARVs I'm shooting for on my finished product. So you can see how one narrative is clear and concise, and you could easily share that with agents and wholesalers. And then if you want to get even more detail, provide even more clarity, you can do that for your own benefit by dialing in, okay, what's dated actually mean, right? What towns in particular in that county are you a buyer in? And that's how you can build out a really clear and concise buy box narrative. And that's how you can know specifically what you're a buyer of and how you can make sure that other people know that as well. And so that's the long-winded definition of what the buy box is and why we even do that and why we even go through this exercise. So let's jump into how we craft that narrative. We start with the end in mind, and now we're going to reverse engineer it. And I'm going to build this out in real time with you, talk you through how we develop it, and then encouraging you to do this for yourselves. Go through this exercise. In fact, I'll already encourage you to comment in the chat BB for buy box if you want access to this file, just so the team can get this over to you. But in the meantime, let's jump in. I just didn't want to forget that we're going to make this available to you guys after the fact. So, like I said, we're focused on single family. You could see the tab here. Later, we could talk about adding a tab for multifamily, right? But let's focus on single family and then the strategy. What's the strategy? Strategy ADA levels. Right? And this could be different for you guys. Maybe you're not in the ADA level / addition, new construction space. Maybe it's single family, maybe it's the BRRRR strategy, right? That could be your strategy. So, but clearly our primary strategy and what we teach inside of our accelerator program is ADA levels, additions, and even new constructions. And so that's why we're going to do this and use this as our reference. So here are the questions we want to ask ourselves and answer to develop the narrative I opened with. So where do these questions come from? What even makes these questions relevant? Well, you go to your local MLS and you do a search for residential properties. And then there's a lot of questions here that we leveraged to create that list. So these are the kinds of things that an agent would key into the MLS to list a property. And so if it's good enough for them for the listing of properties, it's a great place for us to start. And so if you're curious where we got the questions to ultimately craft the narrative, that's where they came from. And you can do the same thing for, like we said, other asset classes. I'll quickly share this so I don't forget later. And you can go and do a search. And if you don't have access to this, you can leverage an agent partner. You're going to be creating this for your benefit and for the benefit of the agents, brokers, wholesalers that you work with. So someone in your market can get access to this. A lot of this stuff's also on Zillow, but multifam. And then you can see a bunch of different categories. And that's how you would build out your questions for your buy box narrative for a different asset class. So, but anyway, let's jump back in and let's hit it. So like we said, we are buyers of dated capes, ranches, and bungalows. And so those vary in size. But for the purposes of this exercise, we're going to buy anywhere from 600 square feet to 2,200 square feet. And so I'm using reference the deals that we've bought and done. And so I know that the smallest cape or bungalow we'd ever consider buying is a 600-foot house. Anything smaller than that's like a studio apartment, right? And then we've bought ranches or ranches with raised ranches with attached 2-car garages at the 2,200 square foot, level. So we know that that's about the range. Again, this is not meant to be a hard and fast rule. This is meant to start providing you with the clarity that you can then use to develop your narrative, right? So that way you can write a clear, concise narrative, but you need to start with these questions first. Minimum bedrooms. Yeah, so the house has to have a bedroom and maximum bedrooms. You would say, well, should there be any maximum number of bedrooms? And I would argue that there should be. Right? I think if a house has more than 4 bedrooms, chances are it's kind of chopped up and wonky. We'd still buy it, but we'd want to know, where did this other bedroom come from? Did they add a 5th bedroom by reclaiming one of the bays in the garage? Right? You may have seen that in the past. And if that's happened, then we're going to want to understand, and that's going to change the scope of work. Right. So that's important to just be mindful of. And that's why that question is there. It's not to say we're not going to buy the house because the previous owner converted one of the garages into a bedroom. But at least we're going to know that they did do that. Right. And that's going to kind of get us thinking, all right, that's going to change the scope, because now we got to reclaim that bedroom as a garage. So that's a very specific example to kind of illustrate why that question is even important. Minimum bathrooms. Well, we want the house to have a bathroom. They're all going to have at least one, I imagine. And then maximum bathrooms, that's not really applicable. It doesn't matter whether it's got a ton of bathrooms or 3 bathrooms, whatever the case is. That's not really important. We're going to wind up adding bathrooms anyway. More often than not, these houses that we're buying are going to have 1.5 bathrooms, right? And folks aren't living in houses they're not living in refreshed houses with 1.5 baths, right? They're going to want 2.5 minimum baths in these finished houses. But so again, maximum number of baths, not as important. Minimum purchase price, maximum purchase price. So if you recall, we gave some clarity here and we talked about this 200 to 350 range. And so that's going to be different for a lot of you. You're going to need to kind of think about like what asset class, in what markets, and then what strategies, and that's going to dictate what you're going to be willing to pay. Again, like these numbers have changed a lot. The minimum purchase price on this type of asset class in the markets where we are active was at one time, I'm going to put it, that's the cheapest we've ever paid to go in and do this strategy. And that number maximum has gone north of 500 now. Right. So just to use real numbers as the minimum we've paid in maybe 6 or 7 years ago for the same asset. In fact, we just bought in the same town where we paid 165, we just bought for 342. So that's very telling of what's happened over the course of the last 6 or 7 years in our market anyway. So again, this is just about getting a range, right? Like for the purposes of the narrative, here's our dialed in range. We'll spend less if there's an opportunity to spend less and still do what we want to do, still do the add a level / addition. And we'll spend more if we're going into one of those higher end towns where you got to really pay to play, right? The numbers are going to be higher going in. So we know to expect that. And that's why these numbers are what they are. Maximum rehab amount. So I'm going to put a number here, and I'm going to encourage you to think about, well, depending on what you're paying to go in and what your expected ARV is and the scope, right? If it's a bungalow, a cape, a ranch, whatever the case is, they're each going to warrant a different scope of work and in turn, a different total rehab amount. Well, for you to provide your wholesale partner with a little bit of clarity around like how much you're looking to spend, this is a good question. But what it does more so than anything else, it's not about pinning you down on the amount of money you're willing to spend. It's more about giving them a comfort level around the scope and the amount of work you're willing to do. And so if they find an opportunity that checks a lot of the boxes and it matches, it's within your buy box, and it does require a whole bunch of work, and they know that you're comfortable taking on $350,000 renovations, you're going to get shown that deal. And so if this number is a little bit lower, say it's a 150, right? Like your comfort level is around doing 150K renovations, right? Those are more like high-end cosmetics, right? They're not going to show you this type of deal. And so that's a question for you to ask of yourself. And as you go through this exercise, think on that and then say, yeah, where's my comfort level around the scope and how much I'm willing to spend? And then that's information that you can provide your wholesale partners, your agents and brokers who are kind of helping you farm your specific market. And that's why that question's there. So encouraging you to think about that. That's going to be very specific to you, your asset, and your strategy. Basements, what I'll say about where we are and the types of renovations we do, yes, we want them to have basements. We think basements are huge value add opportunities. And ideally, we'd want them to have 7-foot tall basements. So we could provide further clarification because with 7 feet, we could really do something with that space. And so that's why that's of interest to us. Garage, yes, again, we'd love for it to have an attached 2-car. Again, not to say we wouldn't buy a detached 1-car. In fact, the deal I just mentioned has a detached 1-car. So it's not that you won't buy a detached 1-car. It's that, yes, you want a garage and ideally you want an attached 2-car. And for this strategy, the add a level / addition strategy, that's important because you can go up over the garage. And so if you've got an attached 2-car garage, which is roughly 400 square feet, you get to reclaim that space above the garage. You get that 400 square feet in living space on the 2nd floor. And that's why this is so important. That's a good call. Okay, minimum rent, not applicable for this strategy, right? That's not something we're concerned with regard to add levels because we don't want tenants at all because we're going to need to essentially rip the roof off the house. So minimum rent, not a concern here, but with other strategies, in the single fam asset type, you might need to know that. So just be mindful of that. Minimum age, like I said, we're looking to buy 1950s to 1960s, but that's not to say we won't buy something a little bit older or something, a little bit newer. But again, we're trying to get this dialed in so we can ultimately use these responses to craft this clear, concise narrative. So just want to harp on that just so everybody kind of understands what this exercise is meant for. Maximum HOA. So that's an NA for us. We don't buy HOA. If you were doing something, say single fam asset type, but BRRRR strategy, you might be willing to model in an HOA fee. If that's the case, then be mindful of that and account for that here. Minimum lot size. So I'm going to put a number here for the purposes of this exercise. The smallest lot in this here, right? The better half of Union County, New Jersey, where we're active, that 13 of 21 towns, the smallest lot size you're going to work with is 50 by 100. In other towns, like say of the 13 towns, most are on the grid system and a lot have a minimum lot size of 50 by 100, but that's not the case in all of the towns. And so when you're, sharing your narrative with an agent who's going to kind of help you farm a higher end town, the minimum lot size might be 100 by 100 or 100 by 225. And, there's folks on this call from all over the country where you're hearing these numbers and thinking those are some really small lots, right? That's the type of development we have to do here in our market. In your market, you might have half-acre lot minimums. So just, again, encouraging you to think about how this specifically applies to you, your market, the asset type and strategy that you're looking to work within. Historic districts, no, that's a hard no for us. We just don't want to be handcuffed and limited as to what we could do with the exterior of these homes. A lot of times with the historic, they're gonna enforce some historic preservation commission ordinances, and it's gonna force you to keep the facade of the home or the windows or something, right? The corbels beneath the roof line or in the gable. These are the kinds of things that are going to hurt your budget for one, but then also prevent you in some cases from going for the max ARV. And like, if you recall, we're always looking to force appreciation and set new out sale records with our ARV. So we don't want to be handcuffed in any way. We want carte blanche with design. We want to be able to max these houses out. And so historic could prevent you from doing that. Pools, that's a no for us. Again, we're not in the pool renovation business. That's a challenge. That's a challenge all its own. There are folks that do pools, and that's their unique zone of genius. We don't want to be in the pool business. And so if there are pools, we typically tend to run away. Private wells and septic, no, we want to be on public wherever possible. That's across the board on everything we do. That even applies to our new construction strategy, right? We're just not in the business of digging wells and septic. 55 and over communities. For this strategy, I would say no, but just like HOA, you might find an opportunity to do something like this with a different strategy. That's why that question is there. High tension lines, that's a hard no for us as well. We're just not in the business of taking on these $300,000+ renovations to ultimately produce an $850,000 to $1.5 million house with high tension lines running right behind it, right? I know some folks don't mind living alongside them, but what we found is that with the type of product we're putting out, that is a challenge. And so we don't want that to be the case for us. Again, double yellow, busy roads. No, we're not looking to build on those. Those are going to be a detriment to value. Those are always going to have to be accounted for, and you're going to have to adjust your ARV. What I would say is there are times where that does make sense, right? You've heard the term sleepy yellow road, a double yellow that's kind of not a cut through town. It's not the kind of road where there's a lot of noise and a lot of fast traffic. And there may be a world in which that works for you and for your deal and for your strategy. So that's a question that you'll have to think on and answer for yourself. But for us, we've only ever done it once or twice, and just not part of our core strategy. Train tracks, another one it's mostly a no. What I'll say about this though is that some folks don't mind living in proximity to the train. And for us, we're not too far outside of Manhattan. And so proximity to the train is a good thing for some folks because they want to be able to board the train and get into the city for work. And so that one, you're going to kind of have to think about, like, where are the trains, where are the train tracks, and where do the trains get people, right? So if you're in a commuter city and there's a train within walking distance and you have to kind of look at the track out your rear window, some folks might not mind that. They're going to hear it clearly, right? If there's a train in your town, you'll hear it on the other side of town. But does your buyer want it visible? Again, that's a question for you to think on. I'm going to put no here, but there are situations where that one, where we can adjust for that. Corner lots, I'm going to say yes here, and I'll explain why. This one, it's really important that you know what being on a corner lot is going to do from a zoning standpoint to your projected scope of work. So if you're going to do an addition or an add a level / addition, just know that if your property's on a corner lot, you've got 2 front yards, right? The 2 sides that face the street. And so that could impact how large of an addition you can do. And so that's a zoning question, and something, we're not gonna have time to go deep on here, but it's something that you should be mindful of if it's applicable in your market. And then schools, yeah, well, we don't mind being close to a school. In fact, we've bought right across the street from schools. We've bought up the street from schools. We know that some folks don't like that. Folks without kids don't love being close to a school because of pickup and drop off. Folks with kids don't mind it, right? They want to be able to just walk their kids across the street to school. And so again, that one is one you're gonna have to think on, and it'll be market and strategy specific for you. But I'm gonna put yes here, and kind of that's how we are looking at these specific questions, and then leveraging these responses to create our narrative. And before I jump into demographics, I see a bunch of questions. So let me jump back in here and run through these as best I can. I fell behind a bunch here, so let me see. Yeah, so Julia, great question with regard to the reno and what happens during renovation as you kind of as you open up the walls and problems come up, and then how's that impacting your budget, and then ultimately does that turn into a tear down? So there's a lot of questions there. What I would say is you're gonna, and actually part of your question answers your question, right? When you get down to the studs, you're really exposing everything that you would otherwise have to deal with. And so what we found with this specific strategy, it's why we teach this strategy. We love this strategy. When you do gut renos, you do additions, add levels, you strip everything down and you're essentially starting anew, right? You're building on an old foundation with the original first floor deck, and you're keeping 1 or 2 exterior walls. But from there, everything vertical, it's all going to be new. And so that's why you can really dial in your budget, right? You're going to get your scope tight because you're going to know you're doing everything, right? You're not trying to keep some things and work around some things. This isn't a lipstick type rehab. In fact, we don't advocate for those types of rehabs. We just don't feel like there's good spreads in those deals. There's great spreads in these kinds of deals. So to answer your question, yeah, you're not going to run into some challenges because you're going to already account for all of this on the front end. And that's why, again, this is that strategy, add levels. We love this strategy. Add levels, large additions, gut renovations, new constructions. Kimberly, are you seeing or doing any no money down seller financing deals? All of them, right? We do, I shouldn't say all are seller financing, but they're all no money down. We will do all of our acquisitions with OPM, other people's money. We'll gap fund with private money, and then we'll come in with hard money for the balance of the purchase and the cost of construction. We have had sellers hold a note for us to do this type of project. That's not our primary buying style. So we have had that work in our favor, but it's not something that we constantly do. And there are folks that do that, right? There's a lot of sub 2 and folks that buy just that way. But for us, more often than not, we're going to go raise the money. We're going to make our offer all cash, and we're going to borrow it from a private money lender, and we're going to get the balance from a hard money lender. So I hope that gives you some clarity there. It looks like Julia had a similar question, so answered that one. Another question, you always want to have inspection done when purchasing a home, helps you know right away if there's anything that needs to be fixed, that you can use that information to tweak your pricing. Yeah, well, this is a funny coincidence. We just unpacked this question on our live coaching call with our accelerator students last night. And so here's what I'll say about that. And it's kind of a piggyback to your original question. When you're going to gut the house, right? As long as the foundation is good, you're going to write an offer with 2 contingencies, structural, so you can make sure the foundation is good, and environmental, so you can make sure there's no buried oil tanks or a compromised sewer line. Those are environmental concerns. So those are your 2 contingencies, structural and environmental. Having a home inspector come out and tell you that there's some moisture issues, and there's some subfloor concerns and things like that. None of that's really going to matter, because for this strategy, I should say, it's not going to be applicable, because you're going to gut it anyway, right? So you're going to take all that out. So having a home inspector come in with regard to this strategy isn't all that valuable. Now, if you're doing cosmetic rehabs and you want to use some of what the home inspector identifies to kind of go back and renegotiate the purchase price, that's a different strategy. Again, I don't really advocate for that strategy, but if that's that's what's common in your market and that's what you intend to do, there might be value then in using a home inspector. So hopefully that's helpful. And and with regard to the finishes on the house, yeah, I agree, right? Like another question here with regard to like what products you put in the house, how do you ultimately finish the house? Part of what we need to do here to add value and set new out sale records is you have to improve the house and be the best house in town, right? Like part of what's, about this strategy, we're not saying over improve. Clearly there's some things that when you go into a market, the market's not going to bear, right? Like, but what makes sense, what's expected at the price point, you have to do all that. Like you just have to do all that to be competitive on out sale. And that's something we advocate for. And so great question there. And let me jump back in. I don't see that there's any others I haven't answered. To demographics, I want to share. So we won't get specific here. We just won't have the time to get into this, but the census, I'm going to just throw in a zip code. that we're active. We're currently active in this zip code. You see it honing in here, and all the data you could possibly want is here, right? Education, employment, the kinds of things that you want to know about for the purposes of dialing in your market. For us, for our purposes, and just based on the time constraints we've got now, we're not going to jump into charts and data and tables. What we're going to do is say, like, what do we want to know about the population in the market that we're actively buying in? We want to see it on the way up, right? We want to see population growth. We want to see household income growing, right? These are the kinds of things. Employment rate, we want to see that ticking up. Employment establishments, we want to see all these crime down, right? Clearly, we want to see that going down. School, we want to see blue ribbon schools. We want to see the best quality schools. What this is more so for is to help you dial in this part of your narrative. The better half of Union County, 13 of 21 towns. And if you think about the 8 towns that are not accounted for here, why aren't we willing to implement this strategy in the other 8 towns? Well, these questions are why, right? These are the questions that knock those other 8 towns out, because the employment rate is not increasing, right? The schools are not good. We want places where schools are good, where taxes reflect that the schools are good, where employers are hiring, where employers are coming, where the population is going. Those are the kinds of things that help you dial in this part of the narrative. And so you're going to want to say, okay, what am I a buyer of, right? Like, what's the asset? Where am I a buyer of the asset? What am I willing to pay for the asset? And then this is how we articulate what we're going to do. So if you think about it that way, you'll ultimately wind up with a really clean narrative just like this. And that's what we're trying to achieve here by going through this entire exercise, right? And so encouraging you guys, those of you that have commented BB in the chat, we're going to get this over to you. My team will get you an editable version of this. And then, right, if you're doing multi, same thing. If you're doing land, same thing, right? And the questions are clearly going to be different, but this is where you start. Single family ADA levels. And you're a Burr investor. I was just on yesterday with a local investor who does ADA levels, additions, new constructions, Burr. And so, there's going to be different columns with different responses to these questions for each of the strategies. And that's what the buy box method is. And that's what this matrix is all about. So let me jump back into the questions. I see a bunch more BBs in the chat. So we're going to reach back out to all of you guys and provide you with a link to this document. So it's an editable Google Drive doc. You would just save a copy on your own drive, and then you can work from this. And then this narrative will give you guys access to that as well. So you can use this for reference as you craft your own. So yes, to answer the questions we're getting with regard to that, we will. And here, I'll also drop in the chat a link for our ADA level accelerator for those that want to go deeper on this. I'll leave this link here, and we'll drop this in the chat over on the Facebook group as well, where we'll unpack this at a far deeper level. I wanted to at least paint a picture, come in high level, give you the resources that you need to start working on this on your own. And if you want our help working on this, specifically around this strategy, around the ADA level addition and new construction strategy, that like forced appreciation, value add type rehab model, click that link and fill that out, and we'll get in touch with you. But I wanted to be sure to share that before I forget. Let me scroll back up, see if there's any other questions that I might have missed. Yeah, there's a comment with regard to demographics, and then knowing what the statistics around crime are. And so that's a really good point. Like, I think what that'll ultimately do, right? Like, the crime rates are going to be high, the schools are going to be poor, and you're going to know that that's the other 8 towns. Whatever county you're active in, you're trying to focus on the better half of that county, the better third of that county. We know, again, by virtue of an exercise that we've done on these calls in the past, our our qualify a market exercise where we go in and we say, hey, can we do the add a level addition model in this town by qualifying the market, the 2.5 times rule, right? You might have heard me say that on other trainings. It's something we do inside of our accelerator. It's us figuring out where this strategy works best. Well, we know that it works in 13 out of 21 towns. When we go back and look at the other 8 towns where it doesn't work, Julia, it's to your point, crime is up. Schools are bad. Nobody works there, right? So that's how this all plays into it's all interwoven, and it all ultimately makes sense when you're done. And so this is the data that helps to craft the narrative. And then when you kind of look at it from a high level and you start talking to agents and brokers and wholesalers in your market where you're going to work with them to farm that market, you're going to see, hey, we don't want you to bring us deals in the other 8 towns because this strategy doesn't work there. And we know it doesn't work there because we went and did all this research, right? And here's what we want to buy. And we're very specific about that. And of course, there's deviations. We talked about where it makes sense to deviate, but think about how much more clear and concise your message is to the wholesaler, to the agent, right? To whoever's helping you farm that territory, and your team, right? Giving your team some clarity around what it is that you guys do and buy. A few more comments. Let me see. Oh, the link isn't, I think, so you might not be seeing the link over on Facebook. If my team's on and they can drop the link in the chat, in the comment section on Facebook, that would be helpful because it looks like some folks are only seeing it here in the Zoom. How do we usually get our comp prices for the areas we're not familiar with? And are we doing Airbnbs? So two very different questions. How are we comping? So the comps, so if you've got MLS access or you have an agent partner that can use MLS, clearly that's going to be the best, cleanest way. Like you've seen the inside of MLS here, quick search, residential, and then you put in what you're going to ultimately build, right? You fill this out with the information that you've got here, and then that's how you'll get your comps, or at least that's where you would start. You could do that inside of Zillow too. You don't need to have MLS access to dial in your comps. The best bet is to do that. If you're going to get really good, solid ARVs after repair values for the types of projects you're going to do, then you're going to need to get serious about your comps. And that could mean using a local partner who has access to all this data and can really help you dial that in. And another reason that's going to be important is because if you go borrow money to do these deals, whoever your lender isn't going to take your word for it. They're not going to take your agent's word for it. They're going to bring in a third-party appraiser to look at your after repair value for the project you're telling them you're going to build. So for the add-a-level strategy, for example, we're going to buy a 600 to 800 square foot Cape. We're going to finish a 3,000 square foot colonial, right? We're going to quadruple the size of that house. So what we're comping isn't what's there now. We're comping what we're going to create. And so the way to do that is to work with an agent, work with someone who's got access to the data. Start with Zillow. If you've got that access, you could start there, get it dialed in, and then expect that your hard money lender, your private money lender, they're going to send an appraiser out to validate your number. And so they're going to pick your number apart. So just expect that. What do we think about buying homes out in the country and a mile from stores, schools, and businesses? A mile is not that far. Frankly, we don't think that that's a non-starter for us. When you say out in the country, that's vague and that could be interpreted a lot of different ways. It depends like where you are. But what I'll say about that is we want to be where the activity is. And so like if you live in a 4 mile or whatever, say you're 2 to 4 miles from downtown, but you've got an active and bustling downtown, a mile's walking distance. People want to be within walking distance. Clearly, that's very convenient. But if you're 2 to 4 miles from downtown, but you got a bustling downtown, you're still going to get folks that are willing to pay a premium to live in that town, especially if schools are good, crime is low, employment is high. There's proximity to the train that gets them to work if they work in a major city and you're in the suburbs, right? Or out in the country, call it the suburbs. So again, that's very market specific. And so a lot of folks on this call are tuning in from a lot of different parts of the country. And so that's incumbent on you to understand like the nuances of your market and figure out, what are people willing to pay to be 1 mile from downtown versus 3 miles from downtown. And again, one last thing I'll say on that is if you have a very nuanced town, it's going to be neighborhood specific. So back to the previous question about doing comps, right? How do you run comps? Well, you can comp a property and you could be in a subset of a town where there's a more desirable neighborhood, because remember we said a minimum lot size of 50 by 100. Well, that could be most of town, but there could be a neighborhood, a subset of town that's a little bit further from downtown where the lots are 100 by 250. And now that might be a little bit more desirable. And so when you're doing your comps, you're going to want to account for that. Just like you would, there's a detriment to value by being on a double yellow on a busy road. There's a value improvement by being in a subset of town, in a neighborhood that's more desirable, that might send its kids to a different school, right? It might have its own school if the town's big enough. So again, just go through this exercise and ask yourself these kind of probing questions and really think on these questions. And if you need help doing this, again, we've always offered to do this exercise in the back office, in the private Facebook group where this is streaming now. And so you should all be seeing this, whether you're in the Zoom and you have the Zoom link or you're in the private Facebook group. So craft your narrative and then drop it in the comments section and we'll take a look at it together, right? That's what this exercise is about. That's what this collective is here for. So encouraging folks to do that. And we're right up against time. So we just wound up wrapping on time. I'm thankful for everybody that was here. I know around the holidays, it's tough to make time to do these types of things, to do the education, to do the training, but I encourage you guys to take the resources that we make available here in the group. In fact, this buy box narrative has lived in the group since June. And so some of you that have been here for 6 months or so will remember the last time we brought this out and we talked about it and unpacked it, and folks did a ton of work on this, and a lot of them shared their narratives. And then we asked some more probing questions to get their narratives even more dialed in. And so happy to do that with anybody that's interested. Again, these live trainings are meant to be engaging, right? They're not esoteric, they're not abstract, they're not theory, they're tactical, practical, nuts and bolts, right? I'm giving you the tools and resources that we use inside of our business and that we use with our students every day to craft this narrative, to ask the right probing questions, right? So all this is made available to you guys. So again, encouraging you to stay engaged here in the group. Thank you for being on the call. We're going just a bit over, but hopefully this was of value to you. I dropped a couple of links in the chat. My team will reach out to everybody with the requests for the buy box narrative, the editable worksheet. And so look for that in your messenger. And again, thank you guys, and I'll see you in the group the rest of the week.